Hello everyone, I'm Brian. Today I'm writing to If God is Formless, How to Pray, Dualistic Worship and Non-Dualistic Vedanta. It's really weird. How can Advaita Vedanta have dualistic views when it's supposed to be non-dualistic? But I think it's more along the lines of it's not necessarily that it is dualistic, it's the teachings to help you to get non-dualistic, I believe. But weird that bhakti yoga itself is in there, but I can understand perhaps. Oh yeah, I do remember now. They say that they have this dualistic point of view until you realize that you are that. Thou. What was Swami Sarvarpiyananda saying? That thou art. You are that, in a sense. So there's this false duality that you're doing, only to realize the reality of that's who you are. Yes, I believe I said it correctly. Anyways, let's get started. I don't think I'll say very much because I'm not really. It's not my flavor in a sense. Although I do understand the duality a little bit in terms of if I were to. Bhakti yoga to me would be more of the worship of the people or the materialist, the Maya itself. Weird to say I worship Maya, not in the sense that I believe it to be a god, but it's more along the lines that whether this is real or not, whether Maya is real or not, you know we live in this world, we live in this Maya, and that you know there is this sense of individuality, whether it is true or not, that we should still have some respect in. It's not to be a slave to it, but to, how do I say, until we realize the truth, and even then, we shouldn't just be destructive. I don't know I don't know how to rightly formulate that. Again, thinking on the spot here. Even if this world is false, does it give us the right to just destroy it? I guess that might be close enough to what I'm trying to say. Just because you understand the reality, or just because you believe in something, whether that's the truth or not, doesn't give you the right to just destroy or harm things. Maybe that's it.
I've received a number of questions lately about how dualistic practices like prayer and deity worship can be performed by the followers of the non-dualistic teachings of Advaita Vedanta. Those teachings declare that Brahman alone exists, and that seems to deny the very existence of individual worshippers and a god to be worshipped. This apparent contradiction leads some people to wrongly conclude that Advaita Vedanta rejects the validity of prayer and worship altogether. This misconception is usually addressed by referring to the foremost teacher of Advaita Vedanta, Adi Shankara, who composed many devotional hymns in praise of various deities, hymns like his popular Bhaja Govindam. And Shankara personally established temples for worship at his 4 mattas, or monastic centers, and elsewhere. Also, Shankara himself promoted the performance of rituals, like Panchayatana Puja, in which 5 deities are worshipped: Ganesha, Shiva, Vishnu, Devi, and Surya. Yet, some people question the historical accuracy of all that. After all, Shankara lived more than 1,200 years ago, and much of the literature about his life is highly embellished. So, in this video, instead of relying on debatable historical evidence, we will turn to Shankara's own teachings to determine whether they support or reject dualistic practices of prayer and worship. Shankara famously wrote, Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya. Brahman is Satyam, absolutely real. Brahman is the uncreated, non-dual fundamental reality because of which everything exists. Brahman is the unchanging substratum of the constantly changing world. On the other hand, Jagat, the world, is mithya, false. Here, false means that the world you experience each day is not as real as Brahman. Unlike Brahman, the world was created, and it's constantly changing. More than that, the very existence of the world depends on Brahman as its underlying substratum. Shankara himself explained all this using a metaphor based on a clay pot. The existence of this pot depends on clay, but the existence of clay itself doesn't depend on the pot. If the pot gets broken into little bits, clay still exists. In this metaphor, clay is said to be satyam, real, independently existent, whereas this pot is said to be mithya, meaning that it's not as real as clay, in the sense that it depends on clay for its existence.
I guess a struggle with a lot of people, especially me, when I first started this was, and maybe even me today, I think, is that even though the clay pot itself the clay pot itself is real, it's not to say that, how do I say, trying to think of a way to formulate this. They say the clay pot itself is false, but it's real because it's there. It's just that it's made out of Brahman. Again, I've always talked about Maya itself being shape and form, no form and function. So clay pot being the form of it, what it looks like, and the function of it, whether it's being holding something, whatever. Much like a pen, the shape of the pen, and then the function of it. I mean, it's real, but it's just that it's like, and this is how I've always described this, a misunderstanding, because like the clay and the pot itself, the clay is the reality of it, but the pot is the form and function. So the pot itself does exist, but it's a misunderstanding. Like it's very difficult to try to formulate this. I have to really really think about it. But I hope you understand what I'm saying. The pot itself does in fact exist, but it's not something that exists on its own, I suppose. It requires the clay for it to exist, but it still exists, and the pot itself is the form and function of the clay. So clay is the absolute reality, the form and function is the pot, but they both still exist. I hope that I think that's about the best I could put it. But it's just that when you try to explain this to someone who wasn't familiar with it, especially me when I first started this, it's really weird to say that it's false, but in reality it is real because it's still made out of Brahman. It's just that it's form and function. So I think that's the best way I can really put it at the moment.
In Advaita Vedanta, the word mithya is used to denote a lower order of reality. For example, a pot you imagine in your mind is less real than this one. The world you experience in a dream is less real than this world. And, according to Shankara, the world you experience right now is less real than Brahman. Shankara never used the word mithya to suggest that the world is merely an illusion or a dream. Vedantic scholars like Shankara don't define mithya as being unreal or illusory. Instead, they define mithya as adhisthana ananyatvam, a state of dependent existence.
Yes. Just like I was explaining, like the pot itself doesn't exist on its own. It is dependent on the clay, but the pot is form of function of the clay. Now, I wonder if people who don't understand this would understand that. Because that is definitely a much better explanation than saying just the world's an illusion. Because, obviously, before any of us starts, understanding Advaita Vedanta or any, probably some Eastern philosophy, I don't know if it's all of them, that, you're saying the world's illusion. Are you crazy? Let me stab you with this knife and tell me if that's an illusion, kind of deal. So it's really weird just to say. That's the reason why it was a bit weird at the very beginning. It's like, no, the world seems real. Definitely feel pain when you stub your toe at night. Especially your small toe.
Let me explain. This pot is not an illusion, nor is this body, this chair, or everything in this room.
What about the fire? I bet you that's an illusion.
Yet, the existence of all that depends entirely on Brahman. None of it is independently existent. None of it is as real as Brahman. For this reason, it's said to belong to a lower order of reality. So, Mithya is a highly subtle concept that can't really be translated by any single English word, including illusion.
Interestingly enough, this were the three things that we talked about with Swami Sarvapriyananda. There's the absolute reality, there's the objective reality, and there's the subjective reality. So far, these are the three things that I've understood. Subjective reality is how we as individual experience. What objective reality is, this pen in the physical world that you and I can see. I will say this: if you cannot see this pen and you're blind and you're watching this, that is very weird. But then again, you really just need to hear things. But you get what I'm saying, that even the hearing of this video is also objective reality, because there's obviously sound coming out of my mouth and in the video itself. Even the pen when I hit it. So objective reality tends to be a shared experience that we can all say, oh yeah, that's real. And it's not to say that everyone has to experience it, but the majority, those I guess who are capable of saying so. If you have color blindness, then obviously you're not going to experience the world the same as we do. But people who don't have defects per se, will be able to say, yes, that is red or blue, or this is a pen, or I can feel the air. I feel the air heating up between my my hands whenever I rub them together. Versus people who have lost their feelings in their hands, who lost the taste in their tongues, or lost hearing, or who have color blindness, or just blind in general. So the objective reality, the absolute reality, is the existence itself, whatever this. I'm sure it's going to be some type of I don't know what to call it, micro atom or whatever, that is the underlying reality of all things that exist in this world. And perhaps maybe that's what is Brahman, maybe. But obviously, in terms of Advaita Vedanta, Brahman itself is the only thing that actually does exist and nothing else. Just everything is just an illusion. Is not the right word. A form and function of Brahman.
Now, consider this. The fact that this object is nothing but clay doesn't prevent me from filling it with water and drinking from it. So even though the pot is not as real as clay, we can say that the pot coexists with clay, in a manner of speaking. This metaphor shows how the world of duality can indeed coexist with non-dual Brahman, but at a lower level of reality. Non-dual Brahman doesn't completely deny or negate the dependent existence of the world, nor does non-dual Brahman completely deny or negate the existence of God. Ishvara, or the existence of any deity, incarnation, or personification of Ishvara. If this is understood properly, there's no conflict whatsoever between non-dual Brahman and worldly dualities. Dualities like worshipper and worshipped, deity and devotee, God and man. All these dualities coexist with Brahman, but at a lower order of reality. We can use this teaching to understand how prayer and worship are practiced by followers of Vedanta. Let's look at the questions now. Our first question is from Elka, who lives in Miami, Florida. She asks, how to reconcile Advaita Vedanta's teaching that God is one and has no form or attributes with various incarnations of God, like Rama and Krishna, who have forms and attributes. When Elka speaks of one God with no form or attributes, I presume she is referring to Brahman. As we just saw, Brahman is the non-dual fundamental reality that gives existence to everything. Everything means everything, including every form or incarnation of God. Brahman gives existence to Rama and Krishna like clay gives existence to pots. In this way, many forms of God can indeed coexist with one formless Brahman, just at a lower level of reality. Next, we have a question from Roshan, who...
I guess that's kind of the thing that you have to separate God. When I guess perhaps I don't know if this applies to everyone. I know definitely in the Western world, and perhaps most world who has religion, cannot separate God from Brahman. And when you say God, when you say God in terms of Advaita, well, I don't know if Advaita Vedanta sees Brahman as God. Brahman, I think perhaps should be something separate from God, because God is is at least from my understanding a lower level of reality to Brahman itself. Brahman itself is existence itself, so therefore if it exists it's Brahman, and God can exist within that existence. God or God and God is created within existence. It's I'm sure a lot of religious people disagree with that, because they much alike in a lot of things. That God is not created. God has always existed, and you could say that God and Brahman are one and the same. But at the same time, when you start thinking of, like, I guess, deities, which is perhaps a different name for God, or perhaps maybe even like a step down from God. You have like what do you call those things? Demigods, which are not, which are like gods and mortals when they have a baby, kind of deal, where you have it's half god and half human. So they're demigods, not full gods. But then when you have these gods of multiple gods, these are not. It's not the one true God. And that's the reason why there could potentially be a confusion between God and Brahman, where Brahman should be its own level, and God and gods all fall under, and well, just everything else falls under its own existence. Jeez.
lives in Nepal. Roshan asks, what is the difference between Brahman and Ishvara? When you say God, are you referring to Brahman or Ishvara? And when we pray, do we pray to Brahman or Ishvara? I'm really glad Roshan asked these questions, because they show the confusion caused when we use common English words like God instead of more precise Sanskrit words like Ishvara. Ishvara is the name for the supreme being, the being who possesses the power to create and sustain the universe, to govern its cycles of manifestation and dissolution, and to bestow blessings upon us according to our deeds. All these powers are considered qualities or attributes of Ishvara. For this reason, Ishvara is sometimes called God with attributes. Scholars refer to Ishvara as Saguna Brahman, Brahman with attributes. This term distinguishes Ishvara from Nirguna Brahman, Brahman without attributes, the non-dual fundamental reality because of which even Ishvara exists. Nirguna Brahman is often referred to simply as Brahman. Brahman is sometimes called the impersonal God, to distinguish it from Ishvara, the so-called personal God. To differentiate Ishvara and Brahman in this way might not be necessary at the very beginning of one's spiritual journey, but eventually it becomes really important. Roshan also asked, when we pray, do we pray to Brahman or Ishvara? Well, you can't pray to a non-dual fundamental reality, the so-called impersonal God. Also, from the standpoint of non-duality, Brahman alone exists, so neither you nor Ishvara exist as independently real beings. On the other hand, you can certainly pray to Ishvara, the supreme being who creates and sustains the world, who governs its cycles, and who bestows blessings on us. Our next question is from Shubhra, who lives in Durgapur, West Bengal. Shubhra says, as human beings, we can only comprehend things we perceive with our 5 senses. So then, how can we pray to a formless supreme being or worship a formless God?
I guess that's the reason why. So hopefully I don't get too much heat for this. I remember saying that, I believe Lakhani says there's like 300 million gods in India. And I can't remember, I don't know if it's Sadhguru that said this, but we all kind of create our own gods. It's the reason why there's so many different gods, like Rama, Ganesh, Ishvara, Shiva, Vishnu, and Brahma, and Kali, maybe Devi. I'm not sure. I don't know if Devi is a individual god or Devi is like a group of like a type of god or creature or something. Like, when you say demons, it's not an individual one, it's a group. You understand what a demon is, or angel, you understand what a group of angels are. There's not one thing called an angel, like humans, I guess, is a better example. I'm not called human, but I am a human. So I don't know if Devi is like that. I don't know if it's actually an individual being called Devi, or if Devi is a group. But anyways, that's the reason why you don't worship the formless one. You have this idealistic version of a god which I believe you try to achieve, follow, so you can become more like this god that you created, or a god that you follow. So any one of the gods that you wish to follow. If you wish to be, I think it's Lakhani that said it. If you wish to be a banker, there's a god for that. If you wish to be a merchant, there's a god for that. If you wish to be a gamer, I'm sure there's probably a god for that. I don't know, because that's something relatively new. But I believe there's like a whole bunch of different gods for individual things that you can pray for, and that's the reason why There's a lot of gods, and you can't obviously worship something that is formless. So that's the reason why there's a lot of forms of God. Ganesh being a very interesting one.
Well, it's not exactly true that it's impossible for human beings to comprehend a formless God. Most of us can comprehend things like empty space, or the number zero, or the principle of justice, even though these are all completely formless. For this reason, worshipping Ishvara without form is certainly possible. Yet, many Hindus do indeed find it difficult to conceive of Ishvara without any form whatsoever. The Hindu tradition is unique in that you're allowed to worship Ishvara in many ways. Ways that are sakara, with form, and ways that are nirakara, without form. You are completely free to choose the way in which you worship Ishvara, according to your own personal inclinations. Hinduism recognizes the differences among individuals and accommodates their personal religious and spiritual needs. This accommodation is based on an important Hindu doctrine, the principle of adhikari bheda, which loosely means differences among practitioners. If you're not familiar with this principle, please watch my video. If reality is non-dual, why are there so many gods in Hinduism? You'll find a link below. Many Hindus worship forms of Ishvara like Shiva, Vishnu, and Durga. These deities are described in thousands of stories found in the Vedas, the Puranas, and other scriptures. Each of those stories is full of important religious teachings and spiritual wisdom. Those stories form the basis for the prayers and deity worship practiced by most Hindus. Yet some Hindus, including many followers of Advaita Vedanta, might consider those stories to be mythological in nature, and consider all the deities to be symbolic representations of Ishvara's powers. Such people often prefer to pray and worship Ishvara without any particular form. Okay, next question. Akarsh asks, is it okay to worship Ishvara as goddess rather than God? Or should we avoid anthropomorphizing altogether? That's an interesting question. Over the years, I've met many people, especially women, who are completely turned off by the male bias and patriarchy found in many religious traditions, including Hinduism. Those problems aren't surprising because scriptures that were written exclusively by men are likely to be biased in some ways. Fortunately, Hindus are not restricted to worshiping only male forms of God, like in Western religions. Hindus are free to worship female forms of Ishvara, forms like Goddess Durga, Lakshmi, or Saraswati, Goddess of knowledge and music. Hindus born in India sometimes take this freedom of worship for granted and fail to perceive the significance of adhikari bheda. Akarsh also asked if we should avoid anthropomorphizing Ishvara altogether. Akarsh used an important philosophical term that describes how we often attribute human traits to non-human things. For example, when a cat rubs up against you, you might think that it's expressing love for you. But the fact is, the cat is actually spreading its scent on you because it's driven by an instinct to mark out its territory. Fortunately, there's really no harm in attributing human traits to a cat, especially if it's your beloved pet. The act of anthropomorphizing your cat actually strengthens your relationship with it. This example shows how stories that superimpose human traits on Ishvara, the Supreme Being, can strengthen your relationship with Ishvara and deepen your feelings of devotion, bhakti. Our final question is from Surabhi, who asks, how to choose a deity? Should we ourselves choose, or should we seek the advice of a guru? Well, according to the principle of adhikari bheda, you are free to choose any deity that appeals to you. Some Hindus adopt the deity chosen by their mother or father. But to ask a guru which deity you should worship might not be a good idea, because it's such a personal matter. No one knows your mind and heart better than you yourself.
Excuse me. I'll add a little bit to this. I will say don't be afraid to ask. Be mindful of what they say, though. I mean, obviously, someone you just met is not going to know much about you. However, someone who kind of studied your behavior that you've known for a long time. So, if you have a best friend that's been with you for a long time, they should know something about you. And then if that best friend so happens to be a spiritual person who understands the different deities, they could make a suggestion for you. Not tell you this is a deity that you follow, but it's like maybe you should look into this deity, see if this matches what you're going through. I believe in that. Don't take anyone's word for it, but listen to what they have to say, and maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. But worth a shot, there's no harm of retrieving some information, receiving information, and help. But just you have to be mindful of it. That's all.
If you would like to submit a question for a future video like this one, please send it to me at the address shown at the end. Be sure to indicate video question in the subject line. Also, please join us online for our weekly satsang, live streamed every Sunday.
There we go. I'll leave that up on the screen so you guys can, if there's any questions. So I'll say this also with the asking for advice from a guru. Even if a guru is you just met this guru or whatever, asking them, it's like what deity should I follow? Hopefully they'll ask you, like, well, what are you struggling in life? So, for example, if it's like, yeah, I'm struggling financially, or struggling in a love life, or struggling at home, struggling at work, struggling in the bathroom, I don't know, struggling somewhere. But hopefully, with at least a little bit of information, it can kind of guide you in the right direction of which deity to follow. Again, I'm atheistic in nature. Is there a God out there? Maybe. I don't know. Right now, as far as the information I got, no. But could I be proven wrong? Absolutely. It'd be hard, though, because the world is strange. The body is weird. We have chemicals, and anything. I'll say this. I went to a psychology class, and they informed me. The psychology teacher told me this. Excuse me. They hook up some pins to the mouse's brain, right? And they had cheese or food in one of the mouse's cage, and they kept pumping a signal into this one mouse's brain where it just kept telling it to eat, 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 eat. And so the mouse ate until it died. And I would not doubt that it's very much possible to a human being, because imagine if you're ever super hungry or you're super starving, imagine that tenfolds, where they're just sending an electrical signal in your brain to constantly trigger that, and you. I wouldn't doubt that it's very possible for you to eat until you die, because your brain is just constantly saying, "Oh, I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm hungry," and you're like, "Man, I don't know why I'm not getting full," and you're just eating everything. So it's very, and the reason why I bring that up is because what we may think as a deity may not actually be a deity, but has a some type of something that can manipulate our brain to do things. Hallucinations are very much real. To people hallucinate, it's not to say that they've taken, I mean, obviously drugs, but not, so even people who don't take drugs, but are just like groggy or have woken up in their deep sleep or something, and then you start seeing things like I forget. There's a terminology for it, but it's where people they're lucid. Is it lucid dreaming? Where they're asleep and they wake up, and then they can't move their body at all. And I think it's because of the chemicals in the brain that's preventing the signals from being sent out. The reason for that is because your brain is doing some stuff while you're sleeping, and if your brain is like dreaming of like running or whatever, you'll be sitting in bed doing like this. So in order to stop you from running in your bed when you're dreaming and you're thinking about it, there's this chemical that blocks the signal. So people who have woken up and are trying to move their arms and stuff, and they can't because that signal is being blocked. So again, this is the reason why it's kind of difficult to believe if there's a deity out there and he can make me do things with my body that I'm saying, oh no, I'm not supposed to be doing that. I didn't choose to do that. He is making me do that. That doesn't necessarily mean it makes it a god, because again, those few examples that I gave are kind of proof that we're like machines. If you unplug a signal and you plug another signal in there and you're like, okay, let me control it, the CPU is like, I'm not doing this. What are you doing to my body? Because you disconnected the signal from the CPU to the body, and you connected your controller to the body and controlling it yourself. Our body is kind of like that. If there's this alien thing that can send out little micro machines into your brain and control the signals, a bit futuristic, but it is very much plausible for it to occur. I went weird on this last conversation, so I'm going to end it right here. This is my reaction to If God is Formless, How to Pray. If you like my content, please consider subscribing, thumbs up the sound down below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next vid.